The Best of Living in Iowa is funded in part by the Gilchrist Foundation. Founded by Jocelyn Gilchrist, furthering the philanthropic interests of the Gilchrist family in wildlife and conservation, the arts and public broadcasting, and disaster relief.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television.
Hello, this is Morgan Halgren. For 16 seasons, Living in Iowa told the tale of what it means to be uniquely Iowan. Tonight, we honor that spirit by bringing you another glimpse into our rich heritage with a few stories from our archives. In this episode of The Best of Living in Iowa, we'll revisit our story where Boy Scouts who took a cross-country trip to Yellowstone National Park in 1921 gathered to reminisce. Take an in-depth look at early racism in Des Moines, and watch our profile of inventor Gary Vermeer, father of the round baler.
Now and then. How many times have you heard someone say, if I knew then what I know now, or back then things were simpler, now life is so complicated? It seems we're always comparing the present and past, and why not? Maybe it's our subtle way of figuring out what's to come. Tonight, our likening of now and then will take us to 3 different eras in our state's history. We'll go back to the 1850s and look at an Adams County utopian community that never made it to the here and now. And we'll visit Davenport for a look at an African-American artist's interpretation of influences from the past which have shaped the present. But now, we invite you to come with us to Clinton for an excursion into the good old days of youth. All of us remember scouting trips and campfire cookouts, and some of us have the pictures to prove we had a good time. You're about to see movies of one of the most ambitious Boy Scout outings in the history of the state. Your guides are in their 80s, and we think you'll enjoy seeing them now and then.
The dawn of the Roaring Twenties looked just dandy to 1921 Clinton. To this bustling, growing river town, world peace had shifted war-weary eyes back to matters close at hand. The young men who would be the next generation's leaders were learning the ways of the world, in part from the international scouting program, the Boy Scouts.
There was a lot of scout activity in our town at that time. We had 18 troops sponsored by different churches.
Out of the blue, the head of scouting in the Clinton area, O.O. Pierce, proposed that a group of Boy Scouts take a trip to Yellowstone Park in Wyoming. Now, of course, such undertakings are commonplace. But then, even a trip from Clinton to Davenport was considered a long journey. Mr. Pierce's notion of transporting upwards of 200 Boy Scouts to Wyoming and back, in Model Ts no less, stood a better chance of being laughed at than being seriously considered.
Seemed like there was some evangelist or something said, you're going to lose people, they'll die.
But Mr. Pierce stuck to his idea and eventually got the backing he needed to get the ball rolling. He and his supporters started the arrangements.
And he more or less pushed other men, business people, and people that had some influence and so on into the thing. And then when it got started, well, it just caught on and everybody wanted to go.
Charles A. Novotny of Cedar Rapids was the photographer for the Great Tour of Yellowstone. He'd been a photographer in the First World War, and it is his images of this historic trek to the Old West that we're enjoying now. Plans for the trip were carefully laid out, along with correspondence between the Clinton Scouting Office and the towns along the route. A rehearsal of the convoy was conducted on Sunday, June 19th, the day before departure. Each boy had earned $25 doing odd jobs to pay his way. Local businesses and citizens had contributed cars, mostly Model Ts. Trucks to carry camping gear and equipment, such as the massive stove and other cooking utensils, were also acquired. All told, 191 scouts and 86 adults set out that Monday morning on one of the last great pioneering adventures of the Wild West. Today, the number of survivors of that trip are dwindling. However, with the help of Bob Ebensberger, we were able to get 5 of the former scouts together. They cited planning and discipline as the two main ingredients for the success of the Yellowstone tour.
But and if we were stopped for any length of time, we would line up and count off and make ourselves known, you know, that we were there. But there was good discipline and there was good order, I mean, and it was a real training for the kids.
Wasn't there a story one time where the brakes went out on one of the cars and they chained a log behind the car
That was Shattuck.
when it went downhill?
Yeah, the big hard
Somebody
ones.
rode the log down the hill to keep the car.
I remember the Indians when I think we was all having calisthenics out there in the field. And those Indians come over the hill, all in feathers, and all war paint on them. And I think all you could see was about 10 seconds was the kids climbing into their pup tents all the way around the edge.
One of the things I enjoyed the most was the rodeo that they had out there. And it was a genuine rodeo. They're real cowboys, you know. And we got right out in the middle to take pictures of that. I mean, in the middle of the way things were going on.
Charles Chick Foy and his father started out together with photographer Charles Novotny, carrying Novotny's film and equipment in the senior Foy's Dodge truck. 3 days later, 18-year-old Chick was put in sole charge of the movie truck.
He started out on the trip with us on the movie truck till we got out there somewhere where we had a barbecue and he broke a tooth. That was it. So he jumped on a train and came home, and I was the sole driver from there on out.
That holdup at Buffalo, Wyoming, that had me going. They didn't tell us about it, and for about the first 2 or 3 minutes, I thought this was real stuff, but it didn't turn out to be that way, of course. They had a lot of fun, they had a lot of laughter and all this kind of thing.
I remember one time sleeping, we come in kind of late at night and it was dark. We sleeping in a park and we, about the middle of the night, and getting bite, so all of us, we woke up and put our bed on top of an anthill, covered with ants.
And in Wyoming, there are a lot of places where there weren't bridges across small creeks, let's say, and you just go down and drive through the creek. That's all. You didn't think about it or anything. And they'd have somebody maybe there waving you on or something like that, you know. Yes, it was something different.
Going across the Missouri River in that old orange crate type of a ferry boat with automobiles on there and all the scouts, and they had to make a number of trips to do it, and the Missouri River was on flood stage, and rather than the ferry to go across, straight across, you'd had to go across on an angle like that to offset the current. And it was doubtful whether we were going to get across, and that wasn't the one trip, but there had to be a number of trips in order to get all the equipment across.
Just another day.
Just another day.
Well, this was the whole goal, wasn't it? To get to Yellowstone?
Well,
You
it
bet it
was
was.
actually the goal, but the whole trip was so interesting. And at that age, everything was new.
And then meeting Mrs. William Cody, Buffalo Bill's wife, on her front porch in Cody, Wyoming. To meet her at that time was kind of something really to think about, something to remember.
You know, the thing that amazed you more than anything else, to me, was the turnout of people at every city, every town. Had food, parades, and they just went out of their way to, of course, it was unique. And this was very impressive, I think, to most of the kids, that the people would come out and put these things on big suppers, provide places to sleep. It was great.
After 36 days on the road, the Clinton Boy Scouts returned to a hero's welcome. They quickly disbanded to enjoy all the home comforts they'd taken for granted before. After the trip, scouting in Clinton tapered off. It seems that so much effort had been put into the Yellowstone adventure that a letdown occurred.
I wouldn't say it was a disservice, but I would say it was a lack of interest in scouting because it reached such a peak at that time. So much was put into it.
Still, the lucky scouts and drivers that went on the excursion to Yellowstone earned memories and values that they didn't even realize until later in life.
I think that this whole kind of experience opens up people so that you want to become part of something bigger or something else, you know. And I think that this kind of an experience does that. It helps you in later years to come out of yourself.
Just and right. That's what we want our laws to be, isn't it? But throughout time, many of those laws have been found wanting, particularly in the area of civil rights. Well before the civil rights demonstrations of the 60s, a Des Moines housewife and mother had an experience which moved her to test our laws against racism. Here's how Edna Griffin remembers that time.
The PBS series The Eyes on the Prize focused on the history of the Southern Black Freedom Movement in the 1960s. But the 1960s sit-ins and demonstrations at drugstore soda fountains were not the first protests against discrimination in America. In 1947, Edna Griffin moved to Des Moines. College-educated, raised in the Northeast, she was surprised by the status quo. Even though laws against discrimination were in effect, many Iowa eating establishments and hotels ignored these laws. The signs in their windows stated, "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone."
Civil rights did not become a wide concern, even here among black people, I'm sorry to say, until the South began to organize and move, you see. Before we got a civil rights law on the books in Iowa, there was a restaurant that had refused service to Duke Ellington and his orchestra. I think discrimination bothered me a great deal.
Knowing that a complaint was needed to test Iowa's laws in court, Edna found her way to the Katz drugstore, where she knew blacks would not be served. She was carrying Phyllis, her 16-month-old daughter.
I went downtown to pay the phone bill, and I met a friend, a young man whom I knew, I guess, from the church we attended, and he took her. And it was a very hot day, even though it was 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it was still hot. So he thought we should stop and have a soda. And we went into Katz Drug to have the soda, and almost got served because the young woman behind the counter was so intrigued with Phyllis. She was going to serve us, and she got a signal from somewhere off in the drugstore, no. So we didn't get a soda. Katz claimed he was operating under Missouri law, which is, of course, very ridiculous.
Edna and her friends John Bibbs and Leonard Hudson called on attorney Charles P. Howard and members of a newly formed political party, the Progressives, for assistance.
We went to court. I think the first time he was fined $1. I guess my statement was that that did not pay for my babysitters. As I recall, letting the accountant's book keep that dollar for several years. That Edna Griffin needed a sense of humor, you know. You can't let it get to you.
Despite the guilty verdict and the dollar damages, Katz continued the practice of discrimination at his soda counter. Edna and the Progressives began a startling new plan.
We put pickets in front of his drugstore first. And then we decided it would be much simpler for us, instead of having people crossing the picket line going into the drugstore, we will go in and occupy seats. So eventually we came back to court again, and he was assessed some $300 or $400 by the city, I think. But this was appealed to the Iowa Supreme Court before the national civil rights law was passed.
The state Supreme Court upheld the lower court's decision that M.C. Katz was guilty of willfully and feloniously infringing upon the civil rights of one John Bibbs by refusing to serve him. Edna Griffin was a witness for the state. Edna and her group's polite protest swung doors open all around the state, but Edna says news of the court's decision was received quietly.
I didn't do anything special. We were very pleased, of course, about that. But we understood that Iowa was, as we called it, getting in out of the rain because the national civil rights law was going to be passed.
And it wasn't until the national civil rights law was passed that Edna remembers a celebration.
We all went back and sat in Katz's and got served. We checked it out, and everybody was very happy, even the clerks.
Unlike the protesters who followed a decade or so later, Edna claims she was never in danger during the Iowa protests. She was, however, targeted for some harassment.
Oh, I got a couple of letters, I think, from the Klan, but I didn't pay any attention to them. I turned my letters over to the police department, the detective bureau, I guess.
Katz drugstores have faded away, but that Edna Griffin remains active. Now in her 80s, she helps organize letter-writing campaigns in her retirement home.
I believed in what I was doing. I thought it was very important, still do, and necessary.
Many of the creative ideas of Pella inventor Gary Vermeer confirm the notion that necessity is the mother of invention. In fact, it only makes sense that Iowa inventors would have patents on equipment like the round hay baler, one of the biggest inventions on the farm since the tractor. Here's a look at the prolific mind of an inventor who has an eye for necessity.
It wasn't so long ago that 10 horsepower literally meant 10 horses power. Pella inventor Gary Vermeer remembers threshing grain the hard way, and he knows how good a meal tastes after working hard on the farm all day. That hard work also inspired his creative mind to find ways of doing things easier.
I'd already built a farm elevator, a corn elevator, in the shop at home, and that was on rubber tires, so I could pull it around to the farmers. But there was no way to get the corn off the wagon, and so I invented a wagon hoist. And then when we went around to pick corn in the fall, why, all these neighbors would say, "Why don't you make me one?" And that's really what started Vermeer Manufacturing Company.
And he started his own manufacturing company in September of 1948. He built the cement block building himself. He hired one person and they went into business.
Well, this is the wagon hoist that we designed in about 1942 or 1943, and this is one of the first four.
That first invention, on display in the atrium with Gary's other great ideas, was successful for only a year, when hydraulic systems built by other companies took over. But Gary had started something, and he and his small staff took off on idea number 2.
Now, this here is the one that put us in business. Well, this is that power takeoff drive for hammer mills. It used to be that this part of the hammer mill was just set on the ground. You'd stake it down. And then there'd be a pulley here, and you put a flat belt on it and put a tractor over there, maybe 25, 30 feet away. And then we designed this thing so that you could pull it with V-belts and with a power takeoff, and then you just hook the tractor in front of the machine with a power takeoff, and that was very successful.
Many people would have stopped with one major success. Not Gary. This PTO-driven tiling trencher, developed by Vermeer in the early 50s, was yet another first.
Well, I guess basically our philosophy has always been if other people make it, we don't try to make it, other manufacturers. That's why we had so many firsts in our company. We were the first to make a stump cutter, the first to make a tree mover, the first to make a hay baler, the first to make we had a large round irrigation machine at one time.
He didn't talk a lot about the business at home, but there were times when he did talk about things he was excited about, and the tree spade was one of them. The fact that, hey, we can transplant a tree like we have in our front yard, which is 10 inches round or whatever, we can do that with the tree spade. And I remember him coming home talking about the hay baler.
While Gary claims the inventing process is not very exciting, there are moments the whole family remembers.
One night at about 1:30 he woke up and he says, "Oh, I got an idea." So he left home and went to the plant, but he did come back again.
They were trying to get the baler pickup to start, and they had to use fence posts to throw out in the road to get the baler to start, or the bale, I should say, to start going through. And I think I recall that as being a real exciting time.
Bob Vermeer, Mary's older brother, regards his father as a good manager and problem solver.
Our father was a very unique person. He would go to the customer and talk to them, and because he had a very innovative mind, he could visualize what they were thinking about, either that and or work with people in engineering to come up with a concept.
It's more than an inventor. He's got that intuition of what'll work, but you know what he's really done is he's developed an environment for creativity and keep it simple and find answers and then just plain get it done.
In the early days, Gary took the new products out to the farmers. His sales approach was as innovative and effective as his inventions.
In order to find out whether there's demand, we went to 10 towns, county seat towns in southern Iowa. We'd put an ad in the paper that's saying there was going to be a hay demonstration with a large round baler. And then we'd also put all the 5 places we were going to be that week. Well, this was almost like a county fair. Those cars would back up for a mile. There'd be hundreds of people there. And a lot of times you'd see those same people the next day because they wanted to be sure it worked 2 days in a row. And then we did some advertising. We had inquiries from everywhere.
Gary had once again demonstrated that his marketing skills equaled his abilities to find and fill a need.
And that was 1976 when we already had made 25,000 balers.
And now how many?
85,000 some.
Wonder how many of those are ditched already. Imagine a lot of them. Should be.
45 years have passed since Gary Vermeer began building the wagon hoist for his neighbors. His cement block office has been replaced by glass and brick, and 6 additional buildings.
Now you take a man who can visualize an idea that comes to his mind. Sounds pretty simple when you say it like that, but there's very few of that kind. And not every
This company video attributes Gary with folk hero status, creating an image much more glamorous than that painted by Matilda or Gary himself. While achieving great success, Gary and Matilda have stayed close to their early roots, finding happiness in simplicity.
I think a lot of our employees have better homes than we do, and always have had. But that wasn't our interest. We did have a lot of fun with the family, though.
But we were both brought up very simple families, and that's the way I wanted to keep it. It is wonderful, you know, to make it work and to make a success of it, but that's not what brings true happiness.
The Best of Living in Iowa is funded in part by the Gilchrist Foundation, founded by Jocelyn Gilchrist, furthering the philanthropic interests of the Gilchrist family in wildlife and conservation, the arts and public broadcasting, and disaster relief.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television.